So when you look at clean election campaign, like Gugu has mentioned, what does that clean even mean? Or is it equivalent to, like we discussed a little bit on that before, is it about free and fair election? Or what characterizes that clean? What are the characteristics would you attribute to that term clean in this election? Hello everyone, today we have Gugu Haralu. She is a peace activist as well as a social worker here in Nagaland, and she has been closely associated with the Forum for Naga Reconciliation. And we have Villo, Naleo, and he is the academic dean of Shalom Seminary, Bible Seminary here in Zubza, Kohima. And he is designated as the convener for clean election movement under the initiatives of the NBCC, which is Nagaland Baptist Church Convention.
Yeah, right.
So here we're going to talk about the clean election campaign and why does it matter and how long we can really stick to this idea and this mission, looking at the ground reality of Nagaland. So thanks for joining for this talk to you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
And I know it's a very busy season for all of us, and as an academic dean, we have been trying to set this up, but
yes.
Because of your time paucity, we could not really catch up, and Gugu was very busy. But finally, we are here to talk about it.
Absolutely.
So, educate us or enlighten us on what is this clean election about. So, how did the idea of clean election campaign begin, from your understanding?
Oh yes, it began in the early 60s.
Wow.
When 29 Naga church leaders came to talk about the free and fair elections in Nagaland. And then they made a pledge that they will take up this issue to the churches and to the public. And so it was in 1973 that the NBCC on 15 March, they have decided to address the issue of elections in Nagaland. Prior to that, there were we know that Nagas have boycotted the two phases of elections. And after that, there were lots of evils like money, the flow of money, using liquors, and even proxy voting, buying and selling of votes had happened even those days. And so this became a social evil in the eyes of the church, and that is why the church leaders came together and also they made up their mind that this is the issue that we need to address, and that's how it started in the early 60s.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean,
yeah.
Starting at early 60s.
Yeah.
I thought it just started about 5-6 years back. Because
yes, let me clarify that again. Although it started in the early 60s, it took the campaign or the movement took shape, or it came into force, the full force in 2013. 2013, yeah, where a wide state level of initiators and initiatives have been taken place.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was in 2013. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, 2007 to 2013, and then following, yeah, till date.
Yeah. Oh, okay, that's really interesting to know. So, you know that the clean election campaign, some people say it's never going to happen. But when you look at other countries, I think somehow it's happening. Elections are fair, elections are really clean, people don't buy votes. And Gugu, do you think, like, as an activist, peace activist, or having associated with FNR for so long, seeing the ground reality, do you think it's really going to work?
Well, we've been discussing over and over again about how many are skeptical about the whole two words of clean election. It's become an allergy words. People just don't want to listen to it. But personally for me, apart from my association with many social activities in the state, why I would say I continue to vouch for clean election, personally and professionally, and why I speak about it, why I engage with people, and also try to bring in the conversation is because I've really closely watched how elections are conducted, through a relative who wanted to contest cleanly, without using all the mentioned activities which Brother Villo has shared, where money, guns, violence, liquor have been used. But if we really look into it, and you generally ask anybody that who wants to lose an election, right? It all boils down to that, and it's human nature. Nobody wants to win. I mean, lose any game, right? Yeah. And I've really closely seen that. And at one point, I hated election, and I stopped voting. I just disliked the idea of how elections are conducted, and especially in our state. I mean, to just cite an example, if I may. Early morning, before the intended candidate and the family wakes up, there are already people flocking in the house. And it all boils down to simple things like Malikilok Pabule Monase, and you ask for what? Then it goes down to Bacha Bimarase, to Gorde Dutnai. And it made me angry. How is the intended candidate responsible for the milk in the kitchen of that individual or the admission of that child,
So by that, do you mean to say that the voters should not come and ask for such stuff from the candidates?
For circumstances like that, on humanitarian ground, you can actually identify people who are really downtrodden and who are on the verge of that kind of situation. You can easily identify. But to make that as a culture, I find that that's not right. That's why I would say suddenly you realize that, you don't have milk in the kitchen. Suddenly you realize that your children, But these are section of people who have been really ignored, and they find the election, situation as an opportunity to gain something for themselves, which perhaps may sustain for a few days. But you might as well just live with that. It's kind of an opportunity, and we're all looking for opportunity. So if you boiling down to if I believe in clean election, yes, I do. And I do because I practice. And I'm still practicing. And it's quite a strong wave, to stay afloat and also learn to swim in that tide of criticism.
I think that's a nice perspective, which is very enlightening, seeing the ground reality of when the election comes, what happens. And it's nice to know. But there is a question of conflict of whether the egg comes first or the chicken comes first. Because I'll give you an example. The voters know that once the politicians are elected, they're never going to get back to them. And so if the voters don't get the money this time, they have no other time to get that advantage. So, and the politicians also know that if they don't spend the money, they're never going to win. So in this conflicting situation, as a church leader or as a social activist, how do we convince people that, hey, clean election is the best and we must follow this? And because unless people are assured that the politicians will come clean, they will do the work even if they get elected without spending anything, without having that assurance in the people's mind, I think this clean election campaign could be just a farce. So how do you convince people, like from your church perspective, if you have to?
I think when people see politics, they like this attitude of take as much as you can, as quick as you can, that kind of attitude, consumerism, even in the world today. But as a church, from the church perspective, I think we need to look beyond the immediate crisis that we are in. And we need to have a positive anticipation of what we can really create in the future. Although we recognize the reality of people going through poverty, crises in their lives. I think these are temporary. At the same time, politics is also not the answer for everything.
True.
It could be poverty, it could be any kind of sickness, even in this world. And so, what I think is politics in itself is not the answer for everything, but then it's a way that we can do justice to people, people those who are suffering from, those who are being in the downtrodden ones, people those who are neglected. And I think it's a good way of voting for the right person to also look into our future. Although we as Christians, we also are heaven bound, and we are citizens in the next world, which is in heaven, we should also not neglect the reality of what is happening here on this earth. And I think many Christians are heaven bound, forgetting to live what is heaven here on earth. Yeah, I would. So that's my, yeah.
In the point of a church perspective, do you think democracy matters to the church?
Yes.
Because clean election campaign is nothing but fair election.
Yes, free and fair elections. Yeah, that is what they.
And that's a very intrinsic value of a democracy. So does church pay primary attention to democracy?
I should not say primary attention, but then as far as democracy is concerned, the rules and the regulations, and then the principles, I think it's one of the best that we can ask for from the human point of view. Yeah, for just governance and all. But on the other hand, we also recognize that the Naga political issue, so those things are also. So when we talk about clean election, NBCC as a clean election initiative, taking initiative, we also recognize the reality of the Naga political issue. It's like 1929 Simon Commission, 14 August 1947 the declaration, and then 1951 the plebiscite and all. So we are not pushing people, we are not forcing people to go and exercise their votes, but if you are doing it in the right way, that is what the church wants to address also. Yeah, that's one thing in our.
I think that's very important. Church is seen as the reference point for such moral enforcement, and that's very, very important in our society. And church is the only credible body that can do that. Otherwise, who else will do, right? Everyone is politically leaning towards other party or one party. But Gugu, in your understanding, there are a lot of villages, there are a lot of organizations that come out with endorsement to one candidate. I know that is very prevalent in Naga society. So,
which we already see. Yeah.
So, what do you think on that? How is your take?
I think perhaps that's their interpretation of being democratic.
Right.
So it's very interesting, and every day is a learning. You know, learning doesn't stop unless you decide, I know everything. But as you see things happening in our state with our people, even let's say, yes, we're talking about clean election, but even with the word development, you know, it means differently from a government's perspective and from the people's perspective, and many other stakeholders, how they look at developing or development. And we somehow have not had this kind of conversation. You know, what is election, first of all? Why do we even do election? And how will election change the welfare of the people? What kind of people should be elected? You know, what are the characters that we are looking at in an individual? I don't know whether these kind of conversations have happened, but as far as I'm aware, it has not. So when it comes to implementing or exercising one's vote, or talking about one vote, one man, you know, or the governance part, our social structure in a Naga society versus the Indian election, you know, the Naga society versus the Indian election, it's so different. In fact, I find it contradicting and always in conflict. And we don't know whether we're this side or this side. We're like a pendulum, you know, where the wave goes, we're just flowing with it. So looking at the papers in the last few days, everyone's declaring their candidature, full support, which is nice, to be honest, to see unity in that. But then, is it with money or without money? Is something I'm curious to know. And what are the promises that they have exchanged among themselves?
To make that things come up.
Yes. So support is one thing, but what is the negotiation that has happened behind that agreement, you know? And secondly is, I think, clean election, I'm also curious on the word clean, you know? I mean, does it mean that election itself is dirty? Or, I mean, why so much of emphasis on the word clean, you know? I mean, for me, someone who works with so many organizations, but not only organizations, but with people-centric, you know, environment, these small words makes you think deeper. So I hope maybe we can explore that together, you know.
That would be interesting. And
Can I also
yes,
please. When you said about politics in Nagaland, I think we have contextualized the rules of democracy, politics in our own ways. If we look at the Western politics, or for that fact, the Indian politics, it's very different from what we are doing it now here in Nagaland. For us, our politics is not, from a lay perspective, for me, in Naga politics here, Nagaland politics in Nagaland is not politics of manifestos, party ideologies, and all.
It's not that.
True, it's all about clan, village, and then people, those who are in support of them. That matters in the end.
That's a nice.
So I think there is a major clash of the ideology, even, and so we really need to do further research.
Exactly. I totally agree with that, because if you look at Western countries, politics is what ideology do you believe in? Either you are on the left or you are on the right. But when it comes to Nagaland, who is my relatives? You know, like the worst. Suppose, let's say, we have a Nazi party here in Nagaland, okay? People will say, oh, he's my relative, so I'm going to vote for that Nazi party. People wouldn't really think about what ideology they hold. And NBCC has been also strongly warning about BJP, the Trishul party, I mean, in the last election. So it's very important for us to look into the real ideology of the party, because at the end of the day, that will be the impact in our society. So when you look at clean election campaign, like Gugu has mentioned, what does that clean even mean? Or is it equivalent to, like we discussed a little bit on that before, is it about free and fair election? Or what characterizes that clean? What are the characteristics which you attribute to that term clean in this election?
I think when we say clean, it doesn't mean that we're looking for a clean candidate, we're campaigning for a clean candidate. No. But when we say clean, there are something which is dirty in the process of campaigning, in the process of the electioneering process, voting systems in the villages, in the towns and all. So for the fact that people are using threat, muscle power, proxy voting, all these are unclean. Like in a spiritual world, that may be unclean when we say bring it from a church perspective. So it's a spiritual issue, and so if it is a spiritual issue, we need to cleanse it. That's the kind of attitude that the early pioneers have adopted it. So it is a spiritual issue. Greed, love of money, all these are spiritual issues, and that is why they have addressed this, and they want to cleanse it. That's the attitude. But it doesn't mean that we will do it 100% clean. There is so far there is no perfect church on this earth, but that doesn't mean we should not try, because God has given us the ability to do that. But it's a process, and the process also needs to be clean. Then only we will see clean things in the end. So
I like the words that you mentioned. It's not about vouching or supporting the candidates whom the NBCC thinks as a clean candidate. It's not about anybody, but you want the process to be clean.
Yes.
You know, unless the process is clean, the outcome will definitely not be clean.
Yes.
So, for layman's term, or in a more democratic or political term, the clean election would be a free and fair election.
Yes.
And I personally believe that the Baptist or the spiritual ideology is closely in sync with democratic values. Because if you look at Baptist ideologies, it's democratic.
Yeah, it's congregationalist.
Yeah, it's congregation.
Yeah.
That's the more theological word.
Yeah.
So I feel that we are on the right direction to do this. But like you said, it's very idealistic, and this is the goal that we all have set to reach there one day. And no nation or no organization may have never reached that. So Gugu, on the social point of view, what are the people thinking when it comes to clean election, in your understanding? Does clean election, is it really practicable?
I think it is. It is. I mean, personally, as I shared, it is possible. But I believe the excuses, or maybe we're too lazy from a humanistic perspective.
Yes.
We make a lot of excuse by saying that it's not possible. But perhaps there are many reasons why people say that. Like I said, their own personal experiences. It is possible that I can vouch for it. If it was not, then I do believe then this whole electoral, or the processes that even the election board have, the guidelines, how the process should be, Another thing is what people are talking, lots. I mean, it's a continuous process. Same old version of what clean election has shown. But people have also, somehow interestingly, over the years, there has been a shift. We see a lot of young people bringing a new narrative of how they want to look at their state and their own well-being and this whole process of election also. And it may be in a very small degree, but the wave has begun. And I think that's the positive side of it.
Exactly.
I remember asking my father, I said, when you were young, I asked him, where do you think the corruption or perhaps, this whole dilution of our election process happened? So as far as he remembers, he said that he used to hear this campaign on, the Kohima village road, vote for 1 rupiah.
1 rupee.
Yeah, for 1 rupiah,
Okay.
So that's how people would come and vote, And there are a lot of other stories also. If we truly get into people's conversation, in the kitchen, and like the elder says, we Nagas are very close to our fireplaces still now. And that's what determines the larger politics.
True.
One of the things that I find compelling is where many people have lost or are losing faith on church, especially how is church and politics, they should be separate. And I feel that we need to master the challenge to have conversations on this and not run away from such concerns that people are raising and why they're saying it, that why do they feel that politics and
Church.
election or church for that matter, this tree triangle is not correlated, because they don't want church to be involved in the election, the clean election thing. They say that these are two different entities. Let church take care of church thing. Let politics play its own politics. So how do we separate that? That is something that I believe we need to search together. Yeah.
I also truly believe that church, state, politics are separate entities, but they have responsibilities towards each other. But if I have to think on the other side, in a reverse sense, what if the state or the politics, let's say the state involves in the church, would that work, or it's just the other way around?
Can I say
open
something?
To both of you, yes.
Yes, when we talk about the relationship between the church and the state,
yes,
it's an edgy subject. Many people have different opinions.
Right.
They have their own stand. They have their own theological arguments. Even And again, for the Baptists, again, although the Baptists are not the only Christians here in Nagaland, there are also the other denominations. But if we have to go along with the denominational tag, the separation of the church and the state is clear for the Baptists. But then we are in a very different context.
Okay.
Nagaland is considered to be more than 90% Christians, more than 90% Christians.
Right.
And all the Christians in Nagaland, if they are not interested in politics, who will be interested in politics and who will represent us? That's one question I have in my mind. And so I think since the context is different from any other context, our neighboring context, or maybe the neighboring states, Christians in Nagaland should take active role in politics so that we elect representatives who are God-fearing and who will represent our voice, who will represent us, our Christianity, for the fact to the majority Hindus in India, in the mainland. And so for me, I personally believe that we Christians should involve in politics.
In a clean way.
Yeah.
As proposed.
Yeah. And that's one argument that we are also trying to debate around with people with this clean election movement. Clean election is it's a social responsibility of the church. The church work or the church vision cannot be inside the four walls of the church. But clean election as a movement is part of the social responsibility of the church. And we earlier people have considered it as a spiritual issue. Yes, definitely it is a spiritual issue, but then now it's a social responsibility where the church need to play active roles. Yeah, every church, regardless of denominations. Yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense because when it comes to spirituality, it's just spirituality is an expression of how your social behavior is carried out. I mean, spirit is invisible, is intangible stuff. But through the way you carry out your social activities, your spirituality can also be understood. That's just my personal understanding.
yeah,
So like he says, church has a social responsibility towards the state. But one thing that always grayed out in my mind is whether the state has a responsibility towards the church. That's something I would like to understand deeper, not necessarily now, but just confront against myself. So that I'd like to, if you have a view on that, you can share. That's something, because the church has a responsibility towards the state. How about the state towards the church? In what way our state should have that responsibility, so that if we are responsible towards each other, definitely clean election can also be somehow visualizable. I'm not sure whether you agree with that.
I want to try.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because this somehow resonates with a conversation that happened recently.
Okay.
Now the state has a state chaplain.
Okay. In
Right?
Nagaland context.
Yes,
Yeah,
in
in
Nagaland
Nagaland.
context.
Okay.
Which is very interesting.
Right.
So if we are talking about whether the church has the state having its responsibility towards the church, well, I guess the relation is very much visible. Having a state chaplain for the, leaders, for the government, right? Who begins, ends every program, right? And is also having the church services for the leaders, political leaders. So absolutely, it's woven together. It's not a separate, it's two things coming together to be the guiding, the roadmap, right? How to conduct oneself, as a guidance. Now, whether one wants to listen or not, that's a different thing.
Question.
Yeah, that is left to the individual.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely, the church has been being the guider, being the guardian.
the moral guidance.
Yeah. So
Giving moral guidance.
I hope that somehow begins
That
the conversation.
somehow touches.
Yes.
I feel, yeah.
But I also look at it differently in terms of as a believer. I think the moral obligation lies towards the church, because as we see in the Naga context, the politicians or the church they reach out to their respective political leaders to support, to build, So there's always a coordination and collaboration. So absolutely it's woven together in that respect. If we're talking about in a larger context, that's something that I need to learn more, so I wouldn't be able to speak on that. But that's one thing I just wanted to add to what you're saying is, we have not been oriented on the political education part to our people. Like our social structure, the Naga social structure, the electoral process is different. This election process is different. So how do we bridge that, or how do we complement, or how do we leave the other one and take this one? Because as I said, our 2 feet are in 2 different worlds, and hence so much of conflict and messed up. And earlier as we were discussing, we really don't know where to start. You touch one and then it just,
Can I also clarify something? Because when I said Christians should involve in politics, I would also like to clarify something, that the church as an organization, for example, like NBCC or maybe Catholic Association of Nagaland or Christian Revival Associations and all, I think that's another matter. The church as an organization, they should not get into hands and gloves involvement with the state and politics, but I think they must go side by side as a moral influence, as a moral guider, giving moral guidance to the state and to whatever bureaucrats or the people, the government. Because I think there is a difference. Christians' involvement in politics, and then the church as an organization involving in politics. That's different.
Christians involving in politics is to really put good behavior in the politics. I feel, but as a church, as an organization, it's somewhat like keeping a check on the bad behaviors of a state, right? Keeping, as a church, as an organization, church has the responsibility, no doubt, to keep a check in the bad behavior that the state is behaving in such a way. Now, our conversation will mostly, go to people. I mean, since we do in English, definitely English-speaking people. Now, the problem is the villagers. Let's say, okay, that's what I understand. Of course, equally with the English-speaking people as well, people from in the urban areas. How about the villagers? How do you try to make sure they understand clean election and the significance of this movement? Because unless the message reaches them and unless they're convinced, this clean election campaign may never be come into reality.
To the grassroots.
Yeah, to the grassroots. How would you reach out?
Yeah. Actually, the strategy is it goes out in 6 ways. But that, I mean, like to reach out the grassroots, I think the local churches, because it's a church-based movement. We are also one strategy is also networking with people, and so in that, the church is not only focusing on the church-based groups and all, but then collaborating with people, civil societies, NGOs, and then other tribal apex bodies. And so that is one strategy to work along with people, networking, and also collaborating with other societies. So what right now the churches are doing is doing seminars, giving seminars, and then conscientizing people about what is clean election. It's not about campaigning, it's not about partisan politics, but then we are talking about have common platforms in the villages. Let people those who are intending to contest in the elections, that people come and give their talks, their thoughts and their visions and dreams about their people, about their constituency, and so those are some of the messages that people are taking to the villages. But then reaching out the grassroots, I think the church also need to take it, own it, and also produce it in their own locality. So the church is a main platform. Yeah, and so even the Sunday school curriculums are being introduced addressing the clean elections, some of the strategies that we have is that.
Currently, I came across, just to supplement to what you say and even further counter question on that, there was an incident where the pastor literally went to the election booth and sat there for a whole day till the voting process was done.
Yes.
And that was really a good example. Yes. And if all the pastors of the church do that, their members, at the end of the day, almost all 90% of the voters will be Christians and member of the church. That could be one great strategy. But my question is whether the pastors will be equally committed to this mission.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
But then, as a church-based movement, we are also using the principle called "take the log out of your eye" first. Cleaning our own kitchen. And so, if the church is doing this, the church must be clean. We are not sure. We are not sure 100% that it will be 100% clean. But then we must try from our own end. So. The NBCC is giving directives. Excuse me. Then the NBCC is also letting the local churches own this responsibility to do it in their own way. For example, like in a Sumi church, they said, the leadership of that church said, whoever from the church collective leadership, whoever is going to involve in partisan politics and doing election campaigns and all, after the elections we will have a meeting and then we will suspend that particular person for a month. So they've made that resolution before the election, and after the election they came together and then 70% of the church leadership was out of the church.
Really?
Yeah.
Did that really happen?
Yeah, that really happened.
Wow.
Yeah, and so
Incredible.
the church gave a testimony to us when we went there last time in Gatashi.
Exactly.
And so it's a testimony, and it's a practical thing that they are trying in their own ends. Like you have mentioned about a Chakasang pastor.
Oh, it's a Chakasang
Yeah,
pastor?
it's a Chakasang pastor.
Okay.
Yes. And so yes, I can feel, I can think that, assume that the pastor is doing his homework back there in his church. That is why he is bold enough to go and do that thing.
True. Awesome.
Yeah.
So, just before we conclude, do you have, Gugu, any few words from your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there are lots, but to end with it, I think we all have the ability to bring change and be the change.
Exactly.
The question is, do we want to?
Yeah.
Do we have the will? And we need conscious awakening. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a preparation. It's a process, and there's no shortcut to it. So if we wish to see the clean election, I don't say clean election campaigned. A number of times we have expressed that. It's a movement. And it's a people movement.
Yes.
It's a people
So one should not point fingers just at the church or at the politicians alone. Politicians too have said, can we change the mass perspective towards the political or the candidate by not threatening the candidate by saying that if you don't give us this much, you'll see what we're going to do. So there's a lot of threatening exchanges from both sides. It's not just one way. So who ultimately bails the cat out is something that everybody likes talking about.
Exactly.
So in the end, I can only say that wish we can have more conversations like this. And believe me, the last one he talked about having the candidates share the manifestos. I've been part of that kind of process. But at the end, I've seen the same old practices happening at the back door. So it's a give and take from both sides. So unless we start setting an example and we're committed and we are sincere, no matter what the wavelength is going around, it's not going to happen. Any kind of movement is going to fail in Nagaland. It's not just about three of us. It's all of us who's responsible to take our state, our welfare up or down. There's no middle path to it. So that's what I wish to convey.
I congratulate the both of you for the wonderful views and opinions, which are very, very practical and very enlightening and intellectual as well. So I think we should do more often this kind of talk so that people become more aware of it and be committed to it and realize at the end of the day the clean election happening in our state. So thanks for joining.
Thank you.
And we'll have it again. Thank you.
Thank you.